All right. Hi, guys. Today we have Dan Block on the podcast. He is an award-winning teacher and tutor and has been tutoring students for over a decade. Now, Dan specializes in MCAT tutoring and has agreed to talk to us about the MCAT and his extended experience dealing with the test. Thank you again so much for joining us today, Dan.
Thanks, Ron. It's good to be here.
Dan, I'm gonna kick off the questions of when did you take the MCAT and what did you get on it?
So this is a long time ago. This is after I graduated college. I was sort of on the fast track to go to medical school myself before I decided that wasn't in the cards. I graduated from Yale in May of 2000, and afterwards, I hadn't even taken all my prereqs. I hadn't taken a couple lab courses. So in the following fall, I took 2 lab courses actually at Stony Brook. And the August before that, I took the MCAT. So this is August of 2000. And back then the scoring scale was different. So I don't know how many people are aware of the old scale. It used to go from 3 to 45 instead of the current scale of 472 to 528. So back on that scale, and it seems like forever ago, I received a 39. That was, that's a 99th percentile score. And if you kind of play with the percentiles a little bit, which they'll tell you not to do because it was a different test, very similar in style. And, you know, we could talk a little bit more about that, but that's about a 524 nowadays.
Wow, that's a great score. As you said, you decided that medical school was not for you. Could you talk a little bit about why you made that decision?
Yeah, you know, it's hard to connect all the dots even now, but I know retrospectively, I definitely wasn't fully committed to medicine as a career. It was sort of a combination of a few realizations. I loved science classes. I loved puzzles, and I wanted to solve puzzles for a living in some sense, and you can do that in many careers. But, you know, I wish I had been shadowing a couple doctors around that time. And they kept telling me, if you don't know you want this, don't do it. There are other ways you can have interesting life and an interesting career. Use your brain, enjoy yourself. And that really stuck with me. And I followed that advice. Honestly, in retrospect, even thinking about that, those doctors were not that happy with their own choices. I think that definitely played a role in it. But then there are other things that you realize as well, that some of your own drive isn't really coming from you. It's coming from big family pressure to be worthy of their respect and other respect and status and ego and things that I didn't feel like I wanted to be a doctor who's just being a doctor to prove something to myself. I wanted to do it because I wanted to help people in that setting. And that just wasn't driving me. So the sort of bumper sticker version of it at the time was I wanted to enjoy my career more than I enjoyed being good at it. And that's just something that I still feel like there's a little bit of wisdom in that nowadays.
And would you say that you made the right decision looking back at it?
I mean, having, you know, we don't have the controlled experiment, right? We don't have the version of me that was doing that for 20 years as opposed to teaching. I know I love teaching. I'm super happy with my job right now. But I'll give I could speculate, but I just don't know. I'm certainly content that the decision was made the way it was. Do I know for sure it was the right call? I'm never going to know
that. Now, Dan, I just want to ask you, why did you decide to become an MCAT tutor, particularly instead of a teacher in a different field?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I didn't go into it saying to myself, like, I want a career as an MCAT tutor. It's really a couple of things. First of all, in my senior year in college, when I was not quite sure what I wanted to do, I remember going to a career counselor and they said, you know, if not medicine, what do you want to do? And I remember saying, I'm sure it must have come across as sort of naive and arrogant or something, but I remember saying, like, I want to teach like all sciences. They look at me like what? Like that. I had no idea how the teaching track worked and whatnot. For a while, I thought I could just train to teach in medical school and then I could do that. But that's not how it works. And so, you know, I was already doing a lot of tutoring and test prep even before that became my main job. And it really seemed like either MCAT, you know, where I really would get to teach many sciences, or maybe try to make a living working at a fancy prep school where I could, teach multiple courses, and I just didn't want that life. So, once I started working earlier in my career for a large test prep company, I kind of gravitated toward the MCAT side of things, and things were going really well there, and they were looking to give me more classes. And so it was just a good fit.
Okay. And so what would you say your favorite part about being an MCAT tutor is, and your least favorite part?
Yeah. So my favorite part, and it's maybe a little bit corny, but I really love working with students who kind of aren't aware of their own ability and kind of showing them that they're capable of more than they think they are based on their confidence or their grades or what have you. I also really like, given that I'm just immersed in this all the time, I really enjoy just thinking about thinking shop a lot. And every now and then, even though I've been at this for a while, every now and then I'll come up with an idea. I just realized a pattern, that's on the test, or even if it's something more content specific. Like I just found a really good analogy for teaching this thing in fluids, and then I get to kind of workshop it a little bit. I get to try it out with some private students and then in a class. And when it really works, it's really validating. It feels like, you're thinking about it, it's making other people's lives easier at the very least. And that's really cool. So obviously just sometimes seeing the results. I mean, even whether it's kind of a relief or whether it's an underdog story, someone who really comes through in the end, when someone is, this is seen as one of the largest, if not the largest hurdle between undergrad and medical school admissions. And when there's usually so many ups and downs during the process, even if everything's going as well as possible, there are ups and downs. And then when that finally, when the score comes back and they do well, there's just that, hug it out at the end of a Super Bowl championship kind of thing going on, it's intense.
And your least favorite thing?
I guess it's sort of a little bit of the inverse of that. Thankfully, this doesn't happen very often, but it seems like sometimes students kind of float through their pre-med career, many times not really getting what they need to get out of their classes, and they're floating through with B- and C+ and a B and an A- occasionally. And no one at that point stops them in the hallway and says, this isn't going so well. I don't know if the medical track is for you. That just doesn't happen. Most people are positive and look to avoid conflict, and that's all understandable. And I'm sometimes the guy where, the MCAT is kind of cold, right? You'll take a practice test or even the real test, and the score just isn't nearly where it needs to be. And they're having this conversation with me, and it has to be with me that some of their ambitions might come to an end. And like I said, it's rare, but that's not great. I don't like that that falls to me sometimes. It doesn't always, doesn't even most of the time, but sometimes it does. I guess if there's another thing that is my least favorite thing, I feel like I've put in a lot of thought and work over the years in kind of designing a class that really climbs the mountain with those students and gets them, if not the results they need, then quite a bit of improvement. And sometimes, I just feel like I work with 20% of these classes, and again, it's just 20%, but still, and they just don't put in the work sometimes, it's not it's not as if I expect 100% all the time, because it's not realistic and people are doing other things, other classes, other responsibilities at once. But I think I wish that students would meet with me first and say, is this the right time to start preparing? And and then when it's not, that they would kind of listen and not just, there's so much peer pressure, the family wants them to do it now, or the friends are doing it now. I just wish they would just listen and say, we could wait a year, we can wait 2 years, let's do it right together. I all the time I'm spouting out statistics about how the average age for people that get into MD programs is 26 years old, yet there's this sense that if you're not on the right track by 21 and a half, you're a failure. And it's just sort of frustrating that, sometimes I can't get students to listen to some wisdom there.
It definitely sounds like you know what you're talking about. So this kind of leads me into our next section and our next questions, which is, what separates you from the millions of other tutors in the field?
Yeah, I'm not sure how many tutors there are. Be cool.
Probably not millions,
but as far as at least the many other tutors in the field, yeah. But all good. So I don't know. This is such a question that I wanted to like come across as too like self-involved, but it probably would take like an hour, to get into this. I think I'll try to sum up a little bit. I feel like big picture, I'm a lot more ambitious with what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm not trying to just kind of improve scores and say, oh, like, here's like some strategy and let me explain how those questions work. And yeah, good luck on your test. Like I'm trying to build this thing from the ground level. I'm trying to say, let's go through all the sciences again, and let's really reteach them, because whether you have a 3.9, a 3.7, a 3.1 GPA, there are cracks in the foundation. There are those moments where you just kind of, you got the A by beating your professor's exam. You took enough practice exams. You did what you had to do, and that's understandable because that's kind of the game, the gamified aspect of pre-med science sometimes. But I'm actually trying to reteach all that science. I'm actually trying to teach reading comprehension skills, close reading skills. What are the underlying rules of the test? Why exactly did you go wrong and pick that choice and not that choice? Really getting into the psychology of it. I'm trying to also sort of be part of the bigger picture. Like, what classes are you taking? What is now the right time to take the test? Let's make sure you're taking the test the time you should be taking it. Do you have your committee letter in order? Do you have are you on the right track for admissions in other ways? So it's not just a matter of helping out with a few questions, but it's just sort of a broader approach to the whole thing. Part of it too is sort of experience and, again, just sort of, sometimes it's hard to put quality into words, like you talk about you're taking tennis lessons and you have to identify the problem with the person's forehand, and you have to then kind of connect with the student, exactly what's going wrong, and use kind of language that'll help connect, and then talk about the practice skills that are necessary to change to get that to happen. I just think all of that, I've been really lucky to have, it's like a couple thousand students now, not all of them in classes, but quite a few. And you just pick up a lot over the years, doing that. So I think that's a difference. Most people, as someone that used to train teachers back in the day, the way this industry works, just the way the commercial aspect of it works, is most tutors are doing it for part-time work for a couple years. Or the other side, you do have some real experts in the field for sure. A lot of them are trying to build these national brands and have a lot of teachers then working under them. And that also, you don't get the same kind of experience. So I'm kind of in this very uncommon middle ground that I've been lucky enough to get set up at Stony Brook.
Awesome. Now, Dan, what would you give advice to a student that's either preparing for the MCAT or just beginning that preparation?
Yeah, so I don't know, besides good luck and get in touch about the course. sorry to be too shameless there, but let's just say I was giving advice and nothing to do with the actual preparation that I do, and I just had to tell them a few things. I think if you tell students, you give them any kind of review books to relearn science, to review science, you give 100 students the same review books, they're going to learn it all in slightly different ways. I think the first a piece of advice you probably give everyone is, you don't really know the science until you can explain it to yourself unprompted. Until I could say, all right, hey, Ron, tell me everything you know about, tell me everything the MCAT expects of you in thermochemistry, go. And I just kind of sit back and listen. Until you can do that, you don't know it. You're kind of doing something else where you're hoping that certain questions you've seen before get asked again. But the MCAT's main thing is to not do that, is to ask questions of a style or of a language that you haven't seen before. So you need to be able to tell me what the Aldol condensation is every mechanistic step. You need to tell me the different Piaget stages of cognitive development every step without me asking. You just need to be able to do it. That's the first thing. The second main thing, I'll try to limit it to a few. I know it's a short podcast. The second main thing is get away from these kinds of broad-based, I don't want to say scammy reading comprehension techniques, but that's the way I think of them. You look online or you see what students often do when left to their own devices, and they think, oh, I just need to get the main idea. If I just get the main idea of the passage, everything unlocks like a bouquet of flowers that have just bloomed, and it's just, it's so it's so not true. I mean, maybe if you're very good at finding main ideas, a third of the questions can be addressed that way, directly or indirectly. So don't do that. Like, work on trying to prove your answers, prove why one choice is better than the other, so that then those rules can be internalized and utilized in the future. A couple other quick things. Make sure you do all the official AAMC written question packs and full-length exams before you take your test. It's a must. And don't take the test until you're ready. Don't do this thing where you need a 514 to get admission based on your grades and where you want to go, but your practice scores are no higher than a 509, and you say, you know what, maybe today's going to be the day. And you walk in there, and it's understandable, right? Like, everyone wants to be done with it so desperately, and they go in. But these are bad decisions, and they need to like kind of use the statistical truths of their practice scores to decide whether they're ready. There are probably another 20 things I could say, but let me end it there.
So you briefly went over some bad reading comprehension tips that you see over the internet. So our next question is, can you give us any more tips that you see on the internet or given by other tutors that you would not advise students to use?
Yeah, I mean, maybe in some different categories. I think one is just this sense I get looking at, because I even though I tell my students, don't look on Reddit and Student Doctor. I mean, like, and this is not to impugn those sites. Most advice, there's a few kind of trolly, things you see there, but like most of the advice is by well-intentioned students. But the truth is that probably only about 15 to 20% is really good advice. And it's hard, it's the internet. It's just hard to tell the difference, what's good and bad. In fact, if you knew the difference between what was good and bad, you wouldn't need it in the first place, right? So there's that irony there. But yeah, the stuff I see there, there's this sense that you can just kind of like prepare in 2.5 months. Like most people can get ready for the MCAT in 2.5 months. You'd maybe, just crunch the content in 1 month, just start doing tons of practice questions, take some full-length exams, then you're good. Okay, so that's typically not the case. Again, I teach a school year course that runs for 6 months, and only about half the students are ready even then. Okay, and we want to do it right. What else? I think there's just this sense, and I was sort of implying it a moment ago, that the way you get better at this particular test is by just doing tons of questions. It's like, don't worry really about the content. Just get this question set from this company or that from that company. Just start doing questions, understand them all, and then you'll be fine. And it sounds so nice, and it sounds so like, yep, we're rolling up our sleeves, work hard, play hard. Let's get this done. And it just doesn't work that way. And I'm sympathetic to students who think that it does work that way, because it probably does to a large extent for the SAT, for instance. It probably does for a number of undergraduate classes that I have tutored over the years. I don't want to call out any classes in particular, but there are a couple that I've tutored at the university that we're all affiliated with, that, really, if you just do a few years worth of practice tests, the actual midterms and finals are, I don't want to say identical, but very, very, very close. You can get away with a lot. So students have that in their minds, and they don't, it's like my credo here is, I don't want to circumvent the test. I think you gotta handle it directly, and you gotta just learn the skills that you need. I feel like a lot of that stuff online is trying to circumvent and tell you how to beat it, but it's just not how it works. You just don't hear all the stories about when it doesn't work out that way on Reddit.
Now, Dan, you talked about finding the right time to take the test.
Yes.
When do you feel that right time is? When's the most the optimal time of the year to take it? What criteria should be met before you begin to study or begin to take the test? Okay,
yeah, that's a really, really important question, and there's sort of a lot to the answer there. So I think to answer kind of your last question, which is like how prepared do students need to be before taking the test? I think there are two things you need to think about. The first is, do you have the right coursework, the requisite coursework you need to do so? I would say that you must get through the year of Gen Chem and the year of organic chemistry. Like that's probably going to happen by the end of sophomore year anyway. So for most students, they shouldn't be thinking about applying seriously anyway. Preparing seriously before the end of their sophomore year. Now, if you're super motivated this a freshman, you want to start learning physics formulas or just purely, memorizable psychology terms, so be it. But most students probably shouldn't start until after their sophomore year. Then the answer starts to become a little bit more complicated after that. There are some students, especially ones who know that they're good at math, not iffy, but like know that they're good at math, that could probably get very far preparing for MCAT without having taken physics in school yet, or at least taking physics concurrently. Biochemistry, you do not need to take biochemistry in school. It probably helps a little bit, but you don't need to take it in school to start preparing. Biochemistry is mostly a knowledge-driven discipline in the MCAT, so you don't have to worry about that. You probably should take a psych class. You probably don't need to take a sociology class. And so that's sort of one side of your question. The other part is a little bit more complicated, which is like, well, when should you then, so let's say you do have those courses. Should you start preparing your junior year then, or what? What usually happens is this, and I've been fortunate just to kind of see this happen almost the same way again and again over the years, which is that if you're a strong science student to start with, let's say, 3.7 plus science GPA, something like that. I hate to put a number on it that way because GPA does not tell the whole story, and there are things that happen that would both make higher GPAs not strong, but then lower GPAs. I think people understand. So if you are a strong science student, then to me, you have two options if you want to get it done as quickly or as early as possible. You either prepare the summer before your junior year, and then if you're a sophomore, the recommendation is, so if you're a sophomore, you might prepare the summer before your junior year, work really hard over the summer, do some practice and review of the material over the fall, and take the exam in the winter. The MCAT is offered in January. So that's one path. Another path, another sort of quick path, again, for the stronger science students, would be to take most of the junior year to prepare. You start, maybe preparing right around when school begins, and then you look to take the exam in early May, late April, something like that. And then finally, you could take the exam after your junior year. If you're a junior and you're a strong science student, you prepare over the summer. And if you're a strong science student, you've already been through the classes your junior year, then you can take the exam at the end of the summer. The more interesting question is, what if not? What if not all the science classes went well, and it's difficult for you to manage time, or you need to improve your GPA, and so you need to spend more time on your classes, and you can't balance it in a way that's going to be comfortable for you? I think at that point, you want to either do the summer plan, that is, prepare hard over the summer, then take the test in January, okay, because a lot will need to be rebuilt, or just take the deep breath and take a gap year, and maybe use the gap year either to prepare for MCAT or prepare MCAT the summer before the gap year and do it then. I think especially if science curricula was a challenge for you, you need to make sure that when you're preparing for MCAT, you're doing almost nothing else, so that you give yourself like one best last chance of really understanding the material the way they want you to.
Okay, and for our last question, we see that like a lot of schools, undergraduate schools, are making the SAT and the ACT omittable and not necessary for application. Do you think that's ever going to happen with the MCAT, where medical schools are not going to make it mandatory?
Yeah, super interesting question. Given the way that like the SAT and ACT have gone, I still do a bit of SAT and ACT work as part of my career. MCAT's the priority, obviously, but it's so I'm still kind of in that land, in that universe, and students are confused even now. Well, if it's optional, is it better to still do it? Optional doesn't mean I should do it sometimes. So where is that going with MCAT is your question. So based on what I know now, and I'm just using the evidence we have in front of us, my sense is the MCAT isn't going anywhere, and a few thoughts about why I feel that way. First of all, much more so than in high school or in liberal arts undergraduate experiences, standardized testing is just baked into the medical career. Like it's not like at some point people are going to say, standardized testing just is sort of terrible across the board. Let's stop having licensing exams because, let's just if it seems like if you feel good on the surgery table, just go for it. We'll teach you on the job. I think for legal, for liability reasons, for cultural reasons, all the above, the fact that people probably want to go to hospitals where the surgeons are licensed, I don't think that's going away. So because of that, and because the MCAT is such a good predictor of one's ability to succeed in those other exams, and it's not just licensing exams. I'm not pretending to be an expert on the actual medical school experience, but there are other exams you have to take. There's shelf exams that you take, after you do your clinical rotations in medical school. There's continuing education exams. And if you start failing these exams, it is the medical schools hate that more than anything. They've invested all this time and money in you, and then you fail at a medical school. So, that's the first reason I think that it's here to stay. And again, the MCAT is such a powerful predictor of how those other tests how you'll fare with those other tests. I also think that there is a cultural component to it. I think medical school admissions officers tend to be doctors, former doctors, scientists, medical scientists, to whatever extent all of that overlaps, no offense. And I don't know, those type kind of understand the power of statistics, maybe a little more. I'm not trying to impugn the integrity of your average undergraduate committee member. I also just think that the way the world works, there's a little bit more, to whatever extent, inequality or inequality or just cultural other kinds of cultural inequity affects the admissions process. I feel like there's a little bit more of a vocational, one must be competent to be a doctor, that comes from the medical school experience than would come from getting into a liberal arts school. So yeah, I don't see it happening. And I guess one final thought on it is, maybe two quick final thoughts on it, is I think when it came to the SAT being removed, those in the field kind of saw it coming. It was there were just column after column, and politician after politician would say things about it, that were kind of negative. And teachers and committees all had their own mixed opinions about it. So when it finally, when this de-emphasizing finally occurred, it was surprising no one. There's none of the vultures are not around the MCAT as it stands. And yeah, so I think it's here to say. Oh, one last thing is, there's an overhaul of the MCAT every 25 years. The last overhaul was just in 2015 when biochemistry and psychology, sociology was added to the exam. So I just don't think so early on in this iteration of the test. I just don't see them saying, just kidding. We put all this investment into changing the exam, we're just going to drop it now. I think, if it was going to happen, maybe you're talking about 2040, but I don't think your listenership is going to worry about that too much. Let's hope not.
All right. Thank you again so much for coming on and giving us some great tips and information about the MCAT. It's great to have you on. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Is if anyone's listening, is it appropriate to give my email or contact info if people want?
Yeah, of
to
course.
Learn more, maybe.
Of course.
Yeah. So don't make fun of the AOL address, which is what everyone has, but it's db49 at AOL.com. If anyone listening has any questions for me about the process.
Great. And I'll also link it in the description on the video.
Okay, that sounds perfect. Thank you guys so much. It's
Awesome.
been fun.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.